Hey, y'all, welcome to or welcome back to Colonial Outcast, the anti-imperialist podcast that will try, hopefully with a degree of success, to convince you that it is not Israel itself or its affiliated political lobbying groups such as AIPAC that control and inform the entirety of U.S. government policy. Say rather, it is the neoliberal capitalist system which the average American toils under without hope, that uses Israel as a convenient patsy to enact policy, fund wars, and foster interventionism that it was already going to do in the first place. It is this episode's intention to convince you, or if you're already convinced, to convince someone in your sphere of influence that Israel is just one piece of the entire apparatus that is coming for your tax dollars, that is coming for your speech, that is coming for your freedom. The same mechanism of state violence that snipes children in the West Bank is the same mechanism that busts unions and protects Tesla dealerships here in America. That is what we believe is missing from the analysis of prominent conservative critics of Israel, like the Tucker Carlsons and the Candace Owens. They talk about Israel murdering children. It's imperative that we do that, and it's beyond obvious that that's happening. But they talk about Israel sucking up our tax dollars and controlling our politicians, but they won't talk about why that is permitted to happen. Instead, we get Rothschild conspiracy theories, we get Epstein Island narratives, not trying to invalidate that, but you can't control the most powerful empire on the planet with a small child trafficking ring. And you get the myopic focus on the AIPAC lobby. We are here to try and convince you these realities are not the reasons why things are the way that they are. If Israel were to magically disappear, we'd still have the national security state, we'd still have the war state, we'd still have libertarian anarcho-capitalist oligarchs like Elon Musk trying to privatize your grandmother's social security. And most importantly, we'd still have the entire lobbying business model, which pushes us towards interventionism and war. The coltan mined by enslaved children in the Congo goes into Teslas and guided bomb units dropped on Gaza, the proceeds of which expand CEO profits and are used by corporations to lobby politicians for more environmental deregulations, more tax cuts for the rich, more war, more prisons, more police. Let's up our political game by getting into it. Yes, every aspect of human existence is political. So this is the main thrust of why we're doing the episode. To that end, I am your host, Greg Stoker, and we are joined by co-host Mark Wayne, Reformed Christian Evangelical Zionist, here to help debunk Jewish conspiracy theories, and weekly contributor Elena Xenofontos, geopolitical analyst, here to break down the major political lobbies, and we're going to use the Iraq War as a great example of that eclipse the influence of AIPAC by a long shot. Thanks so much for coming on to discuss this contentious topic, y'all. How's everybody doing today?
We're good. It's going to be a long one, but a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. It's great to be on. Good to be on with you again, Alina.
Yeah, it's been a while. Me and Mark haven't had an episode together in a hot minute now.
I know.
Yeah. So my job here, y'all, is to kind of act as an interlocutor for the audience. I'm also going to go through like another kind of intro monologue, but I've been so depressed by this current state of the world and everything that I've been eating like crap and like not being healthy. So I'm on like day 2 of a diet reset, which is a fast. So I'm kind of like a little loopy here, but I'm going to do my best to keep up.
Mm-hmm. Don't worry.
We don't know if he's telling the truth. He could have snuck in a Snickers before having this episode, so don't quite buy that, audience.
Yeah. Now sneaking Snickers, yeah. Not entirely. So I guess we're here. I just want to give everybody kind of like an outline of what to expect. Okay. So we've got the intro. I'm about to plug you with Patreon and stuff because, you know, we do have to remain solvent in this capitalist hellscape. Then we're going to go into like the 14 characteristics of fascism to demonstrate like how our system is in collapse and how we've had characteristics with other fascist governments and supported fascist governments and had the same type of U.S. foreign policy and domestic policy that we've had independent of Israel. and we're going to kind of anchor that idea with what is fascism. Then we're going to go into Jewish conspiracy theories and talk about how they're really just all about not necessarily Jewishness, but class, ideology, ideological alignment, and how they're all part of this overriding system. And then we're going to go into the lobbying section, talking about AIPAC, talking about the Iraq War, and larger, more influential lobbying groups. Then we're going to start looking at, the communal purpose of why the U.S. wants to subjugate West Asia, destroy the axis of resistance coming out of Iran, and also implement regime change in Iran. Then we're going to go into the Citizens United case, where the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that corporations were people and therefore had a lot less regulations on how much they could donate to politicians. Then we're going to talk about the revolving door, how officials and military personnel go from the private sector to the public sector, back to the private sector. And it's the most visible expression of how the merging of government and corporate power, essentially the corporate capture of our government, which drives our foreign policy, bent on making profit because they have fiduciary responsibilities to their shareholders. And then we're going to talk about the difference between the governance of oligarchs and corporatists. And I'm going to try to make this as simple and not theory heavy as possible for all y'all. So I hope you're excited. I know that kind of sound like really dry and lame, but I'll try to, crack a few loopy, fast jokes, that you make when you're on a fast. I don't know. So,
what?
Yeah, I don't know, man.
I think the fasting is getting to him. That's what it is.
No, I just need to stop talking about it and drink more.
No, just grab a Snickers. Just grab a Snickers and eat one real quick.
No.
Don't be the bad influence, Mark.
So
you want the chocolatey goodness.
So, anyways, before we jump into it, did you guys know that Colonial Outcast is on Patreon? And if you become a Patreon subscriber, you can have access to a weekly live Q&A. That's generally Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We might make a second one because we have a lot of audiences in Europe, and that doesn't really work for them. And then we do a weekly comedic episode where we take a break from all the horrors of the known universe and try to look at memes and give some sort of lighthearted social commentary. That's a big popular thing on the whole Patreon thing. And then also we're going to be expanding it to do prep videos. The first thing we're going to do is how to make your go bag for the under a dystopian regime, stuff like that. So we're on Patreon. We're going to expand over there. The link is in the description. And also, if you listen on audio or if you're just watching the video and you have access to your phone, can you go into Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star review? Okay, we're trying to grow over there because we need at least 1,000 reviews when we're about at 500 in order to get pushed into the news and commentary section on the mainstream of the podcast. So if you can help us do that, we'd appreciate it. If not, if you can't be bothered, that's cool too. We're just glad you're here. All right, plugs are over with. Thank you for dealing with that, people. Let's get into
it. One more plug though, dude, that you forgot to put in. So we're heavily shadow banned, guys, obviously. So one thing that we came up with as an idea to kind of circumvent the shadow ban is you guys are welcome, and we would encourage you guys to screen record clips of this podcast, your favorite points, your favorite audio, sound bites, whatever you think really catches your eye and will catch the eye of the outside world that is not aware of us, and post it and splurge it on TikTok, and make sure you tag us or mention us to follow our YouTube channel, Spotify, and our social media accounts. That will help trick the algorithm if we do that. It helps. So if you could, would help.
Yeah, that'd also be great. We're just glad you're here. Okay, now let's get into fascism, because bear in mind, again, if you're new to these different political concepts and you don't really have a base in political science, that's fine. These things take a long time to build up a knowledge base. So I just wanted to anchor this entire conversation about Israel and how the U.S. would be doing what it's doing right now, regardless if Israel was an influence on it Of course, that's a factor, but our main argument is it's not the end all be all, and the entire capitalist imperialist system is what's driving U.S. foreign and domestic policy. And we're going to talk about fascism in order to anchor it. So we're going to be looking at something that I really like. It's called The 14 Characteristics of Fascism by Dr. Lawrence Britt. So he was a political scientist, and he wrote this article in 2003 in the Free Inquiry magazine. He was basically studying the fascist regimes of Hitler, Mussolini in Italy, Franco in Spain, Suharto in Indonesia, and Pinochet in Chile. And he found that, and he argued that they all had 14 elements in common. He calls these identifying characteristics. He calls these the identifying characteristics of fascism, right? The excerpt is in accordance with the magazine's policy. And so we're going to look at these 14 characteristics of fascism, and we're going to see and demonstrate that they're actually like what America is right now, or at least the MAGA movement within America that's captured with a supermajority the entire government. And it's, I think for me, it's a really great demonstration of, you know, it's not just Israel forcing the U.S. to crack down on dissent. You know, they're also cracking down not just on the Palestine movement, but on anti-Tesla stuff. And we're going to get into that here in a second. And that's just a really great demonstration about the U.S. would be doing this anyway. So number one characteristic, powerful and continuing nationalism, right? Fascist regimes tend to take constant use of patriotic mottos, make America great again, slogans, symbols, songs, and other paraphernalia. Flags are seen everywhere, and flag symbols on clothing and in public displays. Yeah, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, has an American flag lined into his sport coat. The example that's self-evident right there. Okay, so number two, disdain for the recognition of human rights. Because of fear of enemies and the need for security, the people in fascist regimes are persuaded that human rights can be ignored in certain cases because of need. The people tend to look the other way, or even approve of torture, summary execution, assassination, long incarceration of prisoners, etc. And what we see, like looking at all of these instant, and we're going to talk about why fascism happens in the first place, but what we see is like the first people they come for are immigrants. And I want to talk about ICE for a second, because right now we've seen a complete disregard for human rights. We are literally shipping legal residents of the United States to a counterterrorism torture prison in El Salvador right now. And they're arguing, the administration right now is arguing that these people don't deserve due process because they're not citizens. And I'm just like, oh, that's really how it starts, because if the government says, or ICE says, you're not a citizen and there's no due process, that means you're not a citizen, even if you are a citizen.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know if Mark wants to say something, but this is the situation. I would say this has been a long-standing issue anyway within a capitalist society. It's not anything that's particularly new. We're just seeing it sort of amplified in the particular moment in time, fundamentally because imperialism is facing, or rather capitalism is facing, a massive crisis. I mean, if you look back to, you know, over the years when we were talking about immigration, when we're talking about immigration laws and what we define as illegal migrants, right? The entire immigration system itself and the whole concept of creating defining immigration as even illegal and legalized migration. It's the entire purpose of it is to basically be able to exploit the world's sort of working class and create a sort of subgroup of people, okay, the illegal migrants, that they're able to exploit, and also blame the vast majority of economic decay and cultural decay on these so-called illegal migrants that they're then able to sort of use in whatever way that they want. Now, obviously, we're seeing that play out and filter into legal migrants as well, as they're trying to crack down on the fact that the United States economy is collapsing in so many different ways, from its debt bubble, its stock market bubbles, from the fact that its middle class is being essentially eradicated, as I've said multiple times. So how do you how do you try to distract people from the truth that is the sort of the economic conditions, and blame it on somebody else? Now we're going towards these sort of migrants as well, on top of obviously the political message that you're also sending in terms of like public dissent as well, and how that's going to be approached. So I mean, it's a very synopsized, I guess. I'm just providing very synopsized analysis here, which you can obviously expand on in many different ways, but it's more so just emblematic of the collapse or the collapsing capitalist structures in the United States. That isn't necessarily new. It's just becoming worse.
Yeah.
Now, while most like MAGA feels comfortable with this happening, what they probably need to realize is it's a slippery slope, because also with designating people as potentially out, like furthering the interest of designated terrorist organizations, you can now use the Patriot Act to treat average American citizens who have citizenship, like not a green card, not even legal residency. We're talking like full-fledged citizen. They can use that as a way to simply cart you off anywhere without any due process. So, like you said, Greg, they're testing the waters by using the pipeline of citizenship as an excuse to haul people off without due process. Well, that same logic and same carte blanche reasoning can be used to cart off actual citizens. And plus, they're scooping up people who are actually citizens and not even bothering to check their paperwork. So in the fog of war, I guess you could say, when they're scooping up immigrants, you could be scooping up American citizens and you would never know, because everybody's just cheering it on, saying that, oh, well, they're not citizens, but we have no idea who's in those trucks, who's being hauled off in these vans, and where they're being taken. So it sets the stage for full out tyrannical dictatorship of just hauling people off. And then you've heard rumors about them investing more money into the prison system, the prison industrial complex, to build more detention centers, basically giving way to concentration camps. So our worst nightmares that libertarians used to be fearful of back in the day about FEMA building concentration camps in the event of a natural disaster, that's happening, except it's not because of like some natural disaster, or like some biological outbreak. It's happening under the guise of mass deportations. So anyways.
Yeah. So yeah. And this goes into characteristic 3, identification of enemies and scapegoats as a unifying cause. The people are rallied into a unifying patriotic frenzy over the need to eliminate a perceived common threat or foe: racial, ethnic, religious minorities, liberals, communists, socialists, terrorists. So we're kind of seeing all of those right now, right? These illegal immigrants are coming in, they're raping people, I guess. They're murdering, they're just criminals. And I would like to say that coming into the country is not a criminal offense. It's a civil offense, but doesn't really matter anymore.
Plus the fact that undocumented immigrants are statistically less likely to commit crimes.
I just want to also add something here. But something people need to understand is that the entire international legal system, when it comes to asylum seeking, is problematic from the beginning in order to enable this sort of situation. Because in the vast majority of cases, for people to be able to even seek asylum, they have to be present in the country that they're in order to actually be able to even apply. So what does this mean? It actually paves the way for illegal migration to begin taking place, as people obviously will have to sneak into the country, somehow find themselves into the country so they can start the legal due process, which therefore makes them an easy target for corruption, like these sort of organized rings, drug lords, who then exploit these particular people who need sort of assistance into getting into a particular country, and therefore placing them in a situation where they are going to be involved in criminal, not themselves involved in criminal activity, but engage in some sort of criminal activity to get in a particular location. And then again, by creating a group of people that are classified as illegals, that they basically are now able to live in the country as illegals, which the actual capitalist class enjoys, because these people are now free, cheap labor. They're also completely undocumented. They don't have any rights. They don't have any sort of labor rights or anything like that. So they actually love this. This is why they hold the entire international legal order when it comes to asylum seeking is fundamentally flawed for this reason. And then, you're criminalizing them at the same time. So when it comes to it, you have the scapegoat, as you just mentioned, in, the 14 sort of little lists of fascism. They become the scapegoat, aka, oh, they're criminals, or they're the ones that are destroying the economy. So it really works in very multifaceted ways.
Yeah. And it's not just, and it's important because we're seeing these crackdowns on campuses where ICE is deporting people on student visas for even publishing like a pretty milquetoast neutral article about divesting from Israel in their college papers. Mahmoud Khalil got disappeared from Columbia University and is currently in LaSalle Detention Center, one of the biggest ones in Louisiana. So we're seeing that, but it's not just, religious minorities, immigrants. It's also, again, it says in here, socialists, terrorists, and it's not just Israel controlling policy, because here's Pam Bondi, Attorney General of the United States, talking about prosecuting to the fullest extent of the law anyone who damages Tesla facilities.
I've made it clear, if you take part in the wave of domestic terrorism against Tesla properties, we will find you, arrest you, and put you behind bars. Today, I'm proud to announce that the Department of Justice has unsealed federal charges against another Tesla attacker. We've charged Cooper Frederick in the firebombing of a Tesla dealership that occurred on March 7th in Loveland, Colorado. All of these cases are a serious threat to public safety. Therefore, there will be no negotiating. We are seeking 20 years in prison. The crime was committed in Colorado, and thanks to the great investigative work by the FBI, the defendant was arrested in Plano, Texas. Let this be a warning. You can run, but you cannot hide.
So is Tesla attacker a new designation? Are we going to add that on to the Department of Homeland Security?
Well, we have to remember that the designation of domestic terrorism came out of the 90s when the government was cracking down on environmental activists doing direct action against energy corporations. So this is really nothing new at all. Domestic terrorism has always been about protecting corporate property. And
but no, this is Tesla attacker. It's a new category now. Yeah, it's even worse than terrorism.
It's exclusive. It's exclusive now.
They have a special place in hell. I've never seen this much media attention or this much media frenzy being given to a simple arson case. It's insane. And it really just goes to show that they're expanding it from immigrants. And if you look at right-wing Twitter, they're just like far left extremists firebombing Teslas. So this is nothing new. They're cracking down on any sort of dissent against the government. And it's not just driven by Israel. This is why we're anchoring it in this. All right. So
I was also just going to add, it really is the same thing as like the McCarthyist movement of like the 50s as well. It's just basically neo-McCarthyism. They were cracking down on anybody who had sort of questioned sort of the United States, it's the system, or who was viewed as being a leftist or a communist, the Red Scare. And people were losing their jobs. People were too afraid to express a political opinion that was basically countering the overarching narrative. And, we're seeing basically neo-McCarthyism on steroids, but it's not, again, like you said, it's nothing particularly new. We've seen this in the United States before, and generally in different parts of like the Western world.
Yeah. And I'm not going to go through all 14 points in detail. I just wanted to bring this up, the supremacy of the military. Even when there are widespread domestic problems, can't even get into it right now. The military is given a disproportionate amount of government funding, and the domestic agenda is neglected. Soldiers and military service members are glamorized. Remember how Trump said he was going to cut the military budget in half when he first got in? Well, J.D. Vance was up in Greenland talking to military service members there, and the messaging from the administration is very different.
So here's the basic plan. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to invest in the Marine Corps and the entire United States military like we never have before. Over $1 trillion we're going to invest in building up the manufacturing base of this country so that you guys, when you do go to war, when you have to go to war, you've got the best weapons anywhere in the world. We know from the long history of the United States of America that while the leading edge of American power is you all, it really matters what you guys have in your hands and what you guys have on your backs when you go to war. And so I promised you, from the President of the United States, we are going to send you, if we have to send you to war, with the best equipment, the best ammunition, the best weapons, and we are going to empower you guys to win when you have to. That's the purpose of the United States Marine Corps. Am I right?
Okay, so what I love about this administration, he says the leading edge or whatever of like U.S. foreign policy is essentially U.S. military power projection. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's just something. It's not just, but here's the thing: it's not just the military getting more militarized. It's also the police, because the cops were founded, in 1829 in London, essentially as a counterinsurgency force, and that's been the model for cops ever since. So they're just funding the police, funding the military, despite slashing social programs. And then I'm just going to go over these other points. Rampant sexism, gender norms. Yes, check. Controlled mass media. Everyone who watches this podcast will already know that's true. An obsession with national security. We've had that for years. Religion and government are intertwined. Yes, now we're having pictures come out of the White House of like prayer meetings before cabinet sessions, which is something that's never happened before. There's supposed to be a separation of church and state. They're trying to completely dissolve that and pretend like the founding fathers weren't deists. They were actually Christians, and that this is a Christian nation, which it's not. Corporate power is protected. The industrial and business aristocracy, and this is going to get into lobbying, which is the main thrust of this episode, of a fascist nation, are often the ones who put the government leaders into power, creating a mutually beneficial business-government relationship and power elite. Labor power is suppressed. In fact, today, April 1st, Trump just signed an executive order to end collective bargaining at agencies involved with national security. So they're just doing some good old-fashioned union busting there. Disdain for intellectuals and the arts. Administration is currently defunding universities that have pro-Palestine or terrorist sympathies. And of course, that's just a cover for defunding the universities, which they already wanted to do. The United States hates its students. This is nothing new. Okay, during the Vietnam backlash, the leading edge was student movements, and the American people villainized them to the fact where they sent in the National Guard and massacred them at Kent State. So really nothing new. This is not Israel spearheading something that's been any different in the United States ever. Then we have the obsession with crime and punishment. Obviously, rampant cronyism and corruption. In fact, Trump's entire cabinet is essentially like real estate developers and billionaires he's known for decades. And basically his policies are basically to deregulate organizations that are investigating his buddies' companies. Like, why do you think Elon Musk is going after the Federal Aviation Administration? Because they're like, hey, SpaceX is not in compliance. That's just one example. And fraudulent elections. Smear campaigns. I'm not sure how fraudulent the elections are now. Oh, sorry, I was supposed to keep that up during that whole time. But at the very least, Trump said vocally, and his advisors have said vocally, he's going for a third term. So I don't know. Looking at this list, it seems like we're pretty in it. Just saying.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. But yeah, like you said, it's been like this for a long time. I mean, even if you look at the politics of Latin America and the relationship between the United States and Latin America, and how many legitimate rulers have been essentially overthrown for the purpose, of the corporate elite, I guess, to sustain control over the natural resources and what they view as their own personal backyard. This has been going on for decades. And, I think you can't keep blaming Israel for what's going on in Venezuela, for example, what's happening in Honduras, or what's happening in
Cuba.
Colombia, what happened in Nicaragua or Chile, because we mentioned there, like, the paper that you mentioned Pinochet. Pinochet was one of the, worst and most brutal dictators. I mean, he was actually trained by the CIA, and they overthrew Allende at the time, who was like a socialist leader of Chile. And it keeps going. The same thing with the dictator of Indonesia, who had very good support, for over 40 years by the United States, and all the, hundreds of thousands, if not more, that he had sort of killed, targeting socialists and communists in order to suppress a leftist movement, because it's suppressing anything that will oppose capitalism, and by that meaning their ability to constantly exploit. This is where their main target always is, and as a result, these sort of operations, brutal operations, and ethnic cleansing and genocidal operations, they're it's pretty much been the vast majority of history for decades now. It's just that now people for the first time are being able to access and see it happen in real time, and it's awakening certain people to certain realities.
And I just want to say, if you want to get into just a baseline primer for what the U.S. did in Indonesia as kind of a trial run, the CIA is kind of endemic of how far they will go or how far they have gone to crush any sort of socialist movement. So it's called the Jakarta Method by Vincent Bevins, and it really informed U.S. policy against, any sort of left-wing movement that they felt was a threat. And that's exactly what's happening now. That's why they're blaming, Tesla vandalism on radical leftist terrorists. Again, just wanted to point out that this is nothing new, but I see so much discourse, not so much on like the left side of the Palestine movement, but like on the more right side of the anti-Israel movement, if we can make that distinction. And I just invite them, and I want to do this episode to be like, hey guys, like, kind of selling yourself short with this analysis is actually way broader and way worse than you thought, than just Israel. Because again, if it didn't exist, these things would still have happened. And so, Mark, I don't know, do you have any thoughts on like the main thrust of these like Jewish conspiracies? They control the United States and the world. Like, how do you usually engage with people when they put it all on Israel?
Well, before I'd rather save that part to a little later, because that's going to be a long section that I wrote out for that. But I did want to talk on like what I call the Israeli pyramid of culpability, which I had talked about like a year ago on when we had an episode about this. Okay. And it's basically like the idea that Israel is controlling the U.S. government. And that's the going theory. That's like the going talking points that we see in the pro-Palestinian movement, that Israel is, we have a captured government by Israel. But I tend to like go down my theory that Israel is just a condom for our empire. It's a way to kind of, it's another term for it would be laundering culpability, where we're laundering the culpability of Israel of everything that's happened, all the corruption to AIPAC, that Israelis are just bribing all of our politicians. So in order to break this down, I actually created a very stupid, simple, what do you call it?
Graphic?
A graphic. Yeah, it's Sesame Street, but I think it's great. So I'm going to share the screen with y'all real quick. Okay, so this is do you see this?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So here is the Sesame Street version of what's going on for your simpleton conservative who doesn't quite get the whole picture. So
and because most of our audience is audio, let's try and describe.
Yeah, we're gonna illustrate. So what we have is a graphic of a pyramid. At the top of the pyramid, the capstone, we have Wall Street. They're the top. So no matter how you cut it, it's not Bibi Netanyahu, it's not Israel, it's not AIPAC, it's Wall Street. We're talking about trillions of dollars of investment. So kind of attached to that is this text. BlackRock profits from most weapon sales, aid to Israel, and stands to be the main investor in redevelopment for a Gaza if it is annexed and ethnically cleansed. Down below that, you have Bibi and the U.S. government.
Sorry, I just wanted to add one thing about the Wall Street capstone and BlackRock profits in terms of redevelopment and reconstruction. This is really important because that's a very lucrative business. It's not just reconstructing Gaza; it's also reconstructing war zones like Ukraine as well.
Yes. I didn't even touch on Ukraine, but yeah, BlackRock is primed to be the main reconstruction company contracted to rebuild Ukraine as well. Yeah. And then down below you have Bibi and the US government. So Bibi and the US government, they take orders from Wall Street. It's that fucking simple. It's the
political class. It's the political class. Yeah, so the political class essentially acts as the agents of the ruling class, so as to giving the illusion that people have some sort of a say, that it's like the spectacle of the political sort of establishment. That's what Bibi and the U.S. government are, to give people the illusion that they can actually change things through like electoralism and things like that.
Yeah, and Bibi's so the question is, okay, so how does Wall Street? So basically, Wall Street gives orders to Bibi. And Bibi does what it's doing. He's the one that it's a laundering scheme. They tell Bibi to tell the U.S. government to do this, and then publicly what we do is the American public sees this man, this foreigner, Bibi Netanyahu, come into Congress, giving a speech, and then 58 standing ovations back in July. So the perception that the American public garnishes from that is that this guy is giving orders to us, but it's a perfect theater for that. So Bibi has ties to executives like Larry Ellison, Jared Kushner, Mitt Romney. Those are some of his strongest ties. So that's where the connection is there.
Right. And I just want to bring up Larry Ellison. He's a billionaire.
CEO of Oracle.
Yes. And Oracle was originally funded with stuff from support from the CIA. So he became a billionaire literally off the CIA.
Exactly. And so, of course, Bibi then gives his orders down to the Knesset and the IDF. And then down at the bottom of the culpability is the Israeli population. So Israelis are fed the illusion that everything is for their survival and prosperity, which they do not realize that they're simply a condom. So next one. Now, this is what Americans see. So that's what's going on. This is the truth right here. This is what's actually happening. But here's what Americans see is this pyramid. So this is what is presented to the American public. Bibi's at the top, Israel's at the top, AIPAC's at the bottom, and then AIPAC bribes U.S. government, Congress, and POTUS with you and then down below, U.S. companies take orders from the U.S. government. That's the illusion. This is the CNN, Fox News, mainstream viewpoint of most Americans who are viewing this from the outside. And I would even say that most of the pro-Palestinian movement also sees this pyramid and thinks that this is the truth.
Now, not that I think this is kind of close to how massive thought leaders like Tucker Carlson would see it as well.
Exactly. So these graphics are designed now. Right, and I want Alina to talk about this next slide. I did a flow chart, a really stupid flow chart to show where the flow of money goes. There you go. Hold on. All right. So, and we're going to talk about this little guy up in the corner here, the far left-hand corner, Alina. But so this is the flow of money. In the green, you have the money flow. In the red, you have the weapons. And in the pink, you have the lobbying and bribes. So now, sorry.
This is going to be really complicated for the audio people.
I know, but basically we'll see at the bottom here, U.S. taxpayer money goes up to the U.S. government, U.S. government and Congress. So the IRS collects tax money. That tax money then goes to Wall Street for military contracts. So whenever we hear a news segment saying that we are sending $15 billion in aid to Israel, what that actually means is that we are paying weapons companies at a very high marked up price. So, for example, a rocket that probably cost maybe $300 to make is now marked up to like $50,000, right? So that's how the money is kind of laundered into Wall Street. And Wall Street, you have the BlackRock subsidiaries, the energy, military, industrial complex. That is then translated into weapons, which gets sent to Bibi in Israel, and then Bibi, the Israeli government, and also Israeli companies. We don't talk about the fact that Israeli military companies receive these weapons and receive this cash flow to develop their own weapons. That money is then laundered down to AIPAC. So they carve up a section of that money down to AIPAC, which then goes into bribes. But mind you, which is the point of this whole podcast episode, is that most of the lobbying money is actually coming from Wall Street. So that the left pink arrow going back to the U.S. government square on the flow chart is bribes, lobbying money, and it's much greater than the bribes from AIPAC. AIPAC is just another incentive, and AIPAC is the poster child for the lobbying group, so that we can focus on that one lobbying group instead of focusing on the larger lobbying group.
Why aren't they registered as a foreign agent? It's like they're not even on the top 20.
Exactly.
They're not even in the top 20.
Now there's another arrow that's going down from Wall Street to the U.S. government square, and that's stock dividends. This is extremely important, and this is also what is not talked about, is that people in the U.S. government don't really need AIPAC money because they stand to make even more money through these arms contracts paid by U.S. taxpayer dollars. So yes, it's great to have a little bit of cash, a little bribe money in an envelope slid under your doorstep, but the real money comes from the stock dividends. So that when Raytheon gets a $3 billion contract to make, JDAMs or whatever, that money then comes back to the people in Congress. Think Nancy Pelosi, because they have stocks in Raytheon. So the stocks go up and they get more money. That's where the real money comes from. It's not even lobbying. It's not even lobbying from Wall Street. It literally is the stock dividends. Now we'll talk about this top corner, which is Saudi Arabia. And that comes later, but that's the
okay. So Elena, what did you want to say?
Well, there's a lot of things said there. So many different things covered. The first thing I was going to say was that essentially, going back a little bit, but then I'll come to what Mark was talking about as well, is that the entire reason there's such a hyper focus as well on Israel basically dominating the, apparently, well, the argument is that Israel dominates the United States and the United States is held hostage by Israel, et cetera, is that this is a very popular argument that actually favors the ruling class, that actually favors these corporations, because it distracts the masses away from actually challenging the true oppressing authorities and the ones that are actually calling the shots. If you have deflected now onto Israel. And unfortunately, because a lot of people, they haven't, people are not necessarily taught within our institutionalized liberal institutions education institutions, to actually challenge capitalism. It's something that is normalized. It's the kind of system that we're taught on. Entertaining ideas, whether they're socialist ideas, whether they're communist ideas, or, that actually are trying to tackle the root cause of problems, most people are not actually exposed to that. So when they're trying to understand what is happening in the Middle East, in Western Asia, in Palestine, and the genocide that's taking place, it's far easier for them to fall into these sort of popular, I think, fables at this point. This old-fashioned narrative that it's the Jews that are behind everything, because it makes it, and the thing is that is accepted as a mainstream even narrative, because it does two things. One, like I said, it distracts the public from actually assessing the system that oppresses them, and two, it also actually then further enables and justifies the whole Zionist argument that we need a state of Israel in order and all criticisms towards Israel is anti-Semitic, because now it's a slippery slope between going from actually criticizing Israel to, well, actually the Jews are the problem. And this is where the slippery slope happens that serves the ruling class, that serves the mainstream media. And that's why it's a narrative that in many ways is accepted and popularized. And unfortunately, many people within, I guess, the pro-Palestine movement who adhere to this as well, the problem is that they care about Palestine, but they don't seem to get into the structural analysis of things. And because it's, and I don't mean to, undermine anyone, but some people also do enjoy the kind of popularity that comes with discussing pro-Palestine issues. And when you, I guess, are regurgitating this, populist narratives, which is known as demagogy, there's an actual word for that. It also brings about further exposure, but you're actually perpetuating a narrative that is fundamentally dangerous. And so what I wanted to get into, which actually now perfectly aligns with the graph, or like the little, not graph, like the
Sesame Street
little
puppet show.
Yeah, no, it was a great little put together. But I would say another classic example would be the Iraq War. And the reason I bring up the Iraq War, which actually shows that what Mark presented almost to a T, is because it's been brought back now, this argument of the Iraq War, in full force by a lot of people within the pro-Palestine movement who are trying to argue that the United States only went to war in Iraq and that so many American citizens were killed in Iraq because of Israel. That And so now the United States, the UK, the Allied forces that orchestrated this war in Iraq are no longer to blame. There is no accountability. We're ridding the capitalists completely of all accountability, and it all falls on the tiny country of Israel, and it's all on Bibi. And if it wasn't for him, nobody would have gone to war in Iraq. And we're not looking at motives. We're not looking at the history. We're not looking at the statistics. We're not looking at the facts, and how the system works. And it's incredibly complex. And so I don't know, like, if you want to chime in now, because I was going to get into, like, I guess some details that I wanted to say about the Iraq War, but I don't want to go on a monologue yet.
I just want to say one thing. Why talking about Iraq is so relevant, because U.S. foreign policy and the way we do things and manufacture consent and the media and politicians doing it hasn't changed since the onset of the global war on terror. It really hasn't. We are staging a fleet, at least 30% of the U.S. B-2 stealth bomber fleets, which can drop 30,000-pound ground-penetrating munitions, ostensibly to hit Iranian nuclear hard sites out of Diego Garcia Air Base in the Indian Ocean. And the reason you would stage out of there is because they can get back and forth to Iran while not flying through anyone else's airspace. And they're moving 2 more carrier groups into the Persian Gulf, 3 aircraft carriers potentially in that entire region, which is bigger than any other air force on the planet. We're not seeing deployment orders for expeditionary forces yet, but we're ramping up to fulfill the neocon vision of the bomb Iran thing that's existed since the Beach Boys have been around and since the Iranian Revolution happened.
And what's the real headline about the B-2 bombers? What's the real headline, though? The one that actually is the root of it all. How much does a B-2 bomber cost?
$1 billion.
$1 billion. Who makes it? Northrop Grumman. Who has stocks in Northrop Grumman? Congressman. So who's lobbying Congress? Northrop Grumman.
All these investment companies like BlackRock, Fidelity, what's it called, Vanguard. These
Vanguard,
which we can get to in a little bit. I was just going to get back into like, I guess go ahead.
I was just gonna use Iraq.
Yeah.
Talk about Iran, and then we'll go to your article about lobbying in Iraq. So we're seeing the same narratives manufactured. Like Saddam, he funded terror throughout the region. You know, he's somehow connected to Al Qaeda. He was a massive destabilizing force. His regime
is a threat to Israel. He's shooting Scud missiles at Israel.
Yeah, his regime is at one point a massive threat, but also about to fall. Like, this is the dissonance we have about Iran being like a post-revolutionary state and then Kamala Harris during her campaign trail saying it's the biggest adversary that America has, which is insane. It has no power projection beyond the region itself. And we're also saying, they're developing, or they already have developed, nuclear weapons, and they cannot be allowed to have nuclear weapons with their ties to global terrorism. It's literally the exact same messaging and playbook about the Iraq War. And of course, there are capitalist interests involved in Iran that, you know, it has to do with isolating them from China, disrupting the Belt and Road Initiative, the U.S. administration, which is kind of like an unbroken policy line from the 50s until now, is still pissed off that, you know, they nationalized their oil and a bunch of other resources within their country under Mohammad Mossadegh, which we overthrew. It's literally the exact same playbook we're seeing right now.
Well, we have to also talk about like the rebuilding effort that will supposedly go on. So I don't know if you guys have heard the rumors that they're grooming Reza Pahlavi's potential role as being the new leader of Iran. So he's like the grandson of the Shah. So they're already priming the new leader of Iran after they topple the current Ayatollah, which is insane because we obviously know who this guy is going to be. He's going to be another Giuliani, who's groomed to be the new leader of Iran, and he's probably going to enact. I mean, it would be in their interest for him to actually bring about an even more extreme government than the Ayatollah, if we're to follow the pattern of Giuliani in Syria, right? I was going to ask that perspective.
The fact that they're grooming the Shah's grandson for that is kind of crazy. But what were you going to say?
I was actually going to say there's actually a lot of similarities in what we're seeing happening in Iran today, but also what happened. I mean, if we go back in the history of Iran and Iraq, it's actually very similar in terms of when Western states actually began having an interest in Iran and Iraq likewise, and when their interest became so significant that they've engaged in regime change and war and you name it. So, I mean, when you look at Iraq as well, because I think people always need to have like a bit of a historical context so they can build upon so that they don't fall prey to these sort of conspiracy theories, is that in Iraq, I think it was something like in 1910, they had discovered oil. Oil was discovered, and I think Iraq at that point was obviously part of the Ottoman Empire. And then as soon as that became the case, it was the UK, the Dutch, the French, sort of all basically invaded Iraq, and by 1915, and they did that fundamentally because they wanted access to Iraq's oil reserves. In the same way, we obviously saw this is the kind of relationship that they had with Iran, and this is why they obviously overthrew the democratically sort of leftist leader of Iran and placed the Shah in power, because they wanted to bring back, obviously, and have control over Iran's oil and their oil sort of company with the Anglo-American Iranian Persian deal. It was the same thing. It was the same thing that was happening in Iraq. So it was actually the Western states. They invaded Iraq. They took Iraq for themselves, not because they were trying to save Iraq from the Ottoman rule, not because they wanted the oil. They established the IPC, which was the Iraqi Petroleum Company, and it was pretty much completely owned by these Western, oil big giants, whether British, French, and Dutch. These were the companies that sort of owned the Iraqi oil. And so when the revolution happened in Iraq, and they eventually gained their national liberation movement, it was also like a leftist movement at the time. By 1972, the Iraqis had actually nationalized their oil. So what did that mean? They basically kicked out all these Western companies. And Iraq is much like Iran, one of the richest countries in oil in the world. They rank second in OPEC plus for the second largest producer of oil after Saudi Arabia. Now, as we've discussed on this channel multiple times before, when you control oil and gas, which is like one of the centerpieces of an economy to be able to run, to be able to produce things like defense, to be able to produce anything for that matter, and to run an economy, you're also able to control the world, to control the world economy. And so when they lost vital, pillars in the Middle East, they lost Iran, they lost Iraq, they also lost control of the world's ability to control the world's economy and the world's market. And from 1972, this was something that was unacceptable. So again, going back to Iraq, this was unacceptable to a lot of these capitalist organizations. So from that point on, they did try persistently to undermine Iraq's capabilities in terms of producing and selling oil, so as to economically destroy them and hopefully bring them down to the mercy of, Western corporations. But at that time, there was a bit of a counterbalance to the USSR. And what happened is that Iraq had actually turned towards the USSR seeking some sort of help. And it was actually the USSR that had helped Iraq at the time build a lot of its major oil fields, like the Rumaila oil field, which is one of the largest in the world, which is in Iraq today, which BP owns now today. And so they were able to kind of push back against Western imperialism until obviously 1991. And then when that was obviously when the USSR fell, and then the Kuwait, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, and that became the opportune moment for Western corporations to abuse their new founding power after the collapse of the USSR, just completely bombard Iraq with sanctions that, as I mentioned in the article that I wrote, UN officials had, classified and stated was an actual genocide against Iraqi civilian population. 1.5 million people died. So again, going back to the idea of genocide, okay, what we're seeing in Gaza is not even something particularly new. We've seen this happen on multiple occasions for the purposes of sustaining and maintaining capital. And they did this. And if you start to look in, so the sanctions happened, and the point was to hollow out the Iraqi economy. We saw the same thing happen in Syria in the last decade as well. And then from that point on, in 2000, and this is where I guess you start to see big oil and how big oil corporations and how generally all these companies, when we talk about the ruling class, sort of mixing with the political establishment. In 2000, when we see, the presidential elections coming, the presidential election of 2000, we actually saw that big oil and the vast majority of corporations had allied at the time and had stood and had lobbied for George W. Bush. They had also lobbied for, and he came with Dick Cheney and what's her name, Condoleezza Rice as well. And all three of these individuals were involved heavily in the oil industry at the time. And, Bush was basically, him and his father and his whole family own oil companies. I mean, they're part and parcel of that entire industry. Dick Cheney was like the CEO of Halliburton. Yeah. I don't want to if you want to say something.
No. This is a good thing that you brought up Bush, because he actually had kind of a low tolerance for Israeli shenanigans too during his presidency. Like he even called the bombing of the Gaza Strip at that time completely unnecessarily violent, which is rich coming from him after the bombing of Baghdad. But it's a lot harder to say that even though Bush was kind of dumb, he wasn't controlled in the same way that we imagine.
But I think a lot of them did, because even if you look at David Cameron, for example, who is on multiple occasions, David Cameron is former prime minister
during his
of the Tories. Yeah, he had actually turned around and said he was the first one to say that Gaza was basically the world's largest open air prison. But yet, they'll still sort of defend Israeli policies, but they're simultaneously, spoke about the barbarity of Israel on multiple occasions. That is the case. But
I just kind of wanted to bring that up as an example point. We've never seen a politician as captured as Biden was thus far, I don't think, but that's because he was a self-proclaimed Zionist. And I'm getting to a point here real quick. And then Trump obviously accepted large amounts of campaign donations from Miriam Adelson. He accepted more from Musk, by the way, so that's just a point we need to make. But the deal is, like, there has been U.S. foreign policy pushback towards Israel, but now we're to a point where kind of the whole system is collapsing, and all we have left is sanctions and violence, which are both military interventions, which are both expressions of hard power. And this is because of where our economy is going. So,
and now it's like that they've kind of like they've streamlined the very visible connection with Israeli lobby money with our politicians. They can now just kind of go to that one specific form of corruption, which is Israeli lobby money to U.S. politicians, as kind of like their excuse for why they're doing this. So the AIPAC connection is it's the poster boy. So like, this is why we're doing all this. We're not doing it for any other reason other than AIPAC money. There's no other there's no other profits to be made in any other department. It's just AIPAC money that's bribing us to do that. So
and the America First people on the right, they see that and they fixate on it because like that's a foreign country. We're not going to like pull up the graph and see like, oh, who wants to redevelop Gaza? Could it be the National Association of Realtors, U.S. Chamber of Commerce? Look down here, RTX Corps, which is Raytheon, Alphabet. So yeah.
By the way, Alina, that was a great article on Substack. I read it fully yesterday. And what's interesting is that group that you're talking about, like Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, George Bush, his VP. They even gave themselves a little name. They created a little club and they called themselves the Vulcans, which was like, yeah. And it was.
But that's the thing,
Could you explain the significance of that?
Yeah. Mark, go ahead.
No. You have the.
The Vulcans.
Yeah. The Vulcans. Yeah. Well, I mean, you're closest to Italy over there, so you explain it. The Roman, Greek, the Greco-Roman connection with that.
Oh God, we're gonna go down to the Greco-Roman.
Just give us a quick history of the Vulcans.
I'm already trying to like get to the rest of the stuff that I wanted to say.
Okay, yeah,
I was gonna go back to a point.
We're gonna go skip over the Vulcans. All right, so
because I wanted to say one point about what you guys said, just like a quick little thing, because you know how you said, you think that Biden is just more bought out. It's not that. It's not that Biden and Trump are more bought out. And that's why there was a bit of pushback when it comes to, I guess, American foreign policy with Israel. It's more so that at that time, there wasn't such an emphatic need to constantly defend Israel because things were relatively at some sort of, there was a stability in the status quo. And so they were still trying to preserve some sort of political integrity by, saying, look, we are balance, we can assert some degree of criticism, whilst behind the scenes we're essentially allowing Israel to continuously occupy more and more of Palestinian territory anyway. And there's been a gradual ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, whether it be in the West Bank or Gaza, etc. So it's not as though that has necessarily changed. It's just that now we're in a different point in time and the material conditions have changed. And because Israel is now so integral to combating all the anti-imperialist movements, which are, I think, centering right now in Western Asia, they have to back and just basically back Israel completely, even if it means that destroying the political integrity that they had before. I guess it's breaking all the illusions of liberal democracy. I guess this is what's happening, which was always an illusion to begin with, but now we're seeing the true face of it, because it's just at that point where things have become far more desperate, where it's contingent to their own survival. So that's the thing. That's what I wanted to say. And
before we get into the article, I just want to make one point on that. The only real challenge to Western imperialism within the entire region is Iran and the axis of resistance that they created, which was really our fault. And I'm just going to explain why in like 30 seconds. When we invaded and overthrew Saddam, of course, anyone who knows Iraq, Iran history, knows that the Iranian government didn't shed any tears for Saddam Hussein. However, the Iranians knew that after Afghanistan and now Iraq, that they could have been next on the chopping block. And what did they do? They got involved in the war in Iraq. They started funding militias, giving them technology, giving them intelligence support, kind of problematic sectarian militias that fought the U.S. troops and stuff like that. And then that over the years expanded. They'd already established relationships with Hezbollah, then expanded to the Houthis, then the popular mobilization units in Iraq. And it's a system of mutual support. And they don't really control them, but they do help and give advice and send advisors to these different groups within the region that literally grew up out of occupation and colonialism and imperialism. Like Hezbollah was a reaction to the Israeli invasion of southern Lebanon. Houthis obviously have their own complicated history, and popular militarization units in Iraq, like Kataib Hezbollah, obviously grew out of the U.S. occupation and the power vacuum and the Islamic State that came after that. But anyways, Iran developed this as a way to bog down Western forces to such an extent that they would never be able to invade Iran or strike Iran. And since that's happened, and since Iran has been on the chopping block for decades, and U.S. foreign policy doesn't change its mind on anything, and it's the only challenge to our interests in the region, really, because we have a bunch of comprador governments there, we have to destroy it. So let's talk about the how lobbying fits into all these foreign wars that we get in that people blame on Israel, and how they apply to Iran. How do you want to start this?
Well, in this particular article, because I'd separated it into two, and like in the first part, I was trying to actually provide, I provided obviously this is a report actually from Statista for 2024. These are the top 20 lobbying groups, organizations in the United States. So yeah, like you said, you got the National Association of Realtors, you got the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is basically all trade and international, like, oil giants and tech giants that will go through that as well. Then they obviously have Meta, which is like its own league of its own, Facebook and all that, the Silicon Valley. You've got a lot of the, you've got, I think, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon. These are the biggest sort of lobbying organizations. But in part one, I kind of used, like, this is what I was saying, like I used the Iraq war, and I kind of started to break down how there was how, I guess, breaking down the war machine and how these particular organizations have vested interest in generating war, how it works in terms of, who benefits. So yes, it's the defense companies, it's, security companies, it's big oil, it's Silicon Valley as well, because, obviously a lot of these, a lot of the new age technologies and surveillance, etc., that became very predominant following the Iraqi war, following the war in Afghanistan, following the general war on terror within the region. A lot of these government contracts went to these corporations. And actually, I said in this article I think it was Brown University. They published a report, I think, a year ago or maybe 2 years ago now. And in the report, they found that I think the United States government has given over 14 trillion in government contracts to defense corporations, usually the top big five, defense corporations, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, etc., big oil. And actually, the five top defense corporations received 8 trillion in contracts. And on top of that, a lot of it also went to, big oil. And the reason I went back to Iraq is this. When you look actually the history of what happened in 2000 onwards, it was very obvious because that they were going to invade Iraq before even 9/11 had actually happened. And the reason was because we even have, when I think when George W. Bush initially first came into power, within 2 weeks of his inauguration, he had essentially set up an energy task force, which was geared by Cheney, who himself was a CEO of the, one of the second leading oil advisory corporations, Halliburton, sorry.
Yeah.
And they had set up, I mean, they were now, leaked classified documents. We have seen that they had set up entire documents where they were outlining, Iraq's oil, who, potential buyers of Iraq's oil. And they had BP, they had Chevron, they had ExxonMobil, they had all these, corporations that were ready to just basically drain Iraq's oil. This was in 2001. January 2001, 9 months before 9/11 happened, while Saddam Hussein was in power, whilst there were nationalists, and they were speaking about how they were going to auction off all of Iraq's oil. And like I said, also Condoleezza Rice herself, she was on the board of directors for 10 years for Chevron, another one of the big oil giants and corporations. And, when they set up this energy task force, they were essentially kind of laying out the maps and the plans as to how they're going to go about this. And they even had certain meetings in 2002 as to, how they were going to auction away Iraq's oil. And then also we have leaked documents, I think it was WikiLeaks that leaked documents and memos from the UK as well, if we just want to bring the UK into like the equation of it, where the trade minister of the United Kingdom was basically in meetings and secret talks with BP and Chevron, and Shell, and they were outlining how, when they go to war with Iraq, BP wants in on it, Chevron wants in on it. And we also see, and I think there was, there's also been a lot of literature published to show the interrelations between even, how, for the UK, for instance, the UK sort of ambassador to Iraq then went on to work for BP, and actually it was a former sort of one of the former British heads, representatives of BP in Azerbaijan, was actually the one that actually drafted Iraq's oil policy. So you could see how much big oil was involved in this war, and how they were pushing for it, and they made it very clear. For a lot of these oil corporations, Iraq was one of the most important strategic gains to have. And that's what we see in a lot of the leaks that were, the leaked memos from 2002. It's what we saw with the Energy Task Force. And then to see how many of these, whether it's in the US or the UK, how many individuals within, the establishment were working in or had close relations with big oil, it goes to show that, when you look at the millions that have been made, because millions were made off of Iraq's oil when they eventually actually did go to war with Iraq. And by 2009, much like they said, by 2009, Iraq's oil was auctioned off, like a massive auction to Western corporations, and it was sold off. And a lot of Iraqi's oil today is governed by Western oil corporations, and it goes straight into an American bank account in the Federal Reserve. It doesn't even go to Iraq. And so to sit down and say that Israel is behind this, when, I think a lot of these big oil corporations from 2000 onwards had actually lobbied over $1 billion to make trillions or in profits, is absolutely ridiculous. And then going back to the graph as well that Mark made, a lot of these corporations, whether it was big oil, whether it was defense companies, a lot of them have BlackRock, which I mentioned earlier, and Vanguard and Fidelity. These are the big three. Although I would also include at this point, I think the State Street Global Advisors. I think we might as well just call them big four investment companies now. These companies own shares, and I think I've written here in the article like the exact amounts as well. They own billions in shares in every major defense company, every major tech company, every major oil corporation. So not only are the oil corporations and defense
in all
companies,
those categories.
At least 5%. I mean, I think if you go, I think it was a little bit further down. I mean, they own something like 30 billion. I think in ExxonMobil, or they own something like 6 billion invested in Raytheon, etc. So what this means for the big investment corporate, these big investment firms, is that they essentially, as when the Iraqi war happened, and basically all of Iraq's oil had basically been appropriated, and the military-industrial complex was receiving trillions in government contracts. The stock market prices, due to the high increase in demand, the stock market prices for these corporations would immediately rise, which gives companies like BlackRock trillions in profits, billions in profits rather. And this is precise. And again, when we're talking about the big investment, these big four investment companies, and I'll just try to wrap up here. I mean, they collect these four companies that I've just mentioned to you. Collectively, they have assets under investment that come at 27.7 trillion. That is more than every country on the planet, with the exception of China and the United States. This is how powerful these countries are, and should be no surprise why BlackRock is the company that also recently purchased the Panama Canal. It's also, the two, ports on Panama Canal, and now owns 43 ports in 25 countries after that deal. And it's no surprise why it's also BlackRock that was in the last G7 summit last year, I think it was in June, when they were discussing how to essentially obstruct BRICS, to obstruct the BRI and establish I think was it the investment, the IGII, the new project that they have to, I guess, counter
the PGII, the Partnership for Global
That's
Infrastructure
it. Yeah,
Investment.
I'm sorry.
I want to tack on
names.
to the PGII after you're done.
Yes, because that's the thing. It's actually BlackRock and a lot of these investment companies that are going to be essentially now. Why Larry Fink, who is the CEO of BlackRock, was at the G7 summit, was to basically inform the world that the way forward is not to accept the BRI, which is going to be essentially trade routes established throughout, the East coming into the West, that would actually bring prosperity to nations, that would be owned by the states, but actually to open up infrastructure, so roads, ports, hospitals, and schools to, I guess, capital markets, which would mean that private corporations such as BlackRock, such as Vanguard, who are the world's most powerful institutions, are going to own them. And this is paramount, because that would mean securing imperialism, securing their global, I guess, hold on the economy. And it would mean significantly pushing back against any anti-imperialist sort of, what they view as anti-imperialist sort of power, as specifically targeting China. And that would therefore mean, to accomplish that and to do so successfully, they also need to essentially eliminate Iran. And we can get into that in a bit, but I want to let Mark say his thing. But yeah, this is how powerful these corporations are. And these are the incentives behind, the war machine and how it operates, and the big money behind it, that makes something like, AIPAC gave 70 million in donations seem like a joke when you're looking at trillions.
It really is a joke. So Mark, say what you want about the PGII, and I think then we're going to transition into the revolving door, about how these corporations are able to kind of merge themselves with the government. So just for context, the BRI is China's global infrastructure initiative. Well, the PGII is the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. It's kind of the West's answer to the BRI counter. It's a collaborative effort by the G7, the group of seven, like the big seven countries like Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, the United States, to counter the BRI in favor of like a Western unipolar economic initiative. So yeah, go ahead, Mark. Sorry.
Yeah. So after reading your article, Alina, it brought up a good point, and I felt like, and I actually feel smart that I actually found something that you missed, so I feel like a little smarty pants over here, but I wanted to point out the invisible elephant in the room, especially when it comes to people who are monitoring this stuff, especially in the pro-Palestinian movement. So to point out the invisible elephant in the room, which has gone undetected for most of the general public throughout this genocide, I keep hearing pro-Palestinians scream, where are the Muslim and Arab countries? Why haven't they stepped in to stop Israel from wiping out Gaza? To which I respond, why would they stop Israel from wiping out Gaza if they are actively, indirectly, albeit indirectly, but actively investing in Israel to wipe out Gaza? And by the invisible elephant, I'm of course talking about Saudi Arabia, which kind of like, even though we're talking about American... UAE, we'll get to Bahrain. UAE in a second, but to focus on Saudi Arabia, to kind of like address this fact that like while this is mostly an American venture, we have to understand that the international class or the transcontinental capitalist class is it has no loyalties, to the American public, has no loyalties to Arabs, Muslims, or Jews in Israel. So in order to better explain what I mean, we have to go down the rabbit hole by looking at the company called PIF, the Saudi Public Investment Fund. This is a Saudi investment firm which has publicly and indirectly invested $2 billion into an American firm that you might sound familiar to you, Affinity Partners. So the reason why this might sound familiar to you is because it was it's owned by this guy. So and coincidentally, Jared Kushner, guys. So, and coincidentally, Jared started this firm right after he left his career at the White House using his father-in-law's position, this guy, to make the official handshake with Donald Trump with this guy.
Mohammed bin
MBS.
Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Just because the audio listeners don't know what you're looking at. Sorry.
I keep forgetting that. Yeah. So PIF, now $2 billion sounds like a low amount, but you have to understand that whenever you have a publicly announced number for investment, you have to understand that like 90% of the rest of the investment is done through subsidiaries, like PIF owned venture firms, joint ventures with U.S. and Gulf based intermediaries, private placement vehicles not subject to SEC scrutiny if routed offshore. So, and coincidentally, sorry, let me get out of this. Coincidentally, Jared Kushner made this comment. I'm sure you guys remember this last year. It's loading.
Happen. Borders are changed historically over time. And so my sense is I would say, how do we deal with the terror threat that is there so that it cannot be a threat to Israel or to Egypt, right? I think that both sides are spending a fortune on military. I think neither side really wants to have, a terrorist organization enclaved right between them. And Gaza's waterfront property, it could be very valuable to, if people would focus on kind of building up livelihoods. You think about all the money that's gone into this tunnel network and into all the munitions. If that would have gone into education or innovation, what could have been done? And so I think that it's a little bit of an unfortunate situation there. But I think from Israel's perspective, I would do my best to move the people out and then clean it up. But I don't think that Israel has stated that they don't want the people to move back there afterwards.
Yeah. I mean,
so obviously he's talking about Gaza, and obviously he's talking about the supposed, venture of turning Gaza into the next Dubai. All this is connected. It's not a coincidence. So now, Alina, going back to your article on Substack, which is an excellent breakdown, but the critical angle that you missed when you're talking about the PGII is that Saudi Arabia has pledged $20 billion to the PGII, the Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investment. And why that's important is because if Gaza was an intended asset for PGII, both as a place of natural resource, like with the Gaza marine gas field, or a strategic location for a port city, then that means genocide and ethnic cleansing of Gaza are not only the result of an action by Saudi Arabia, but may indeed be an investment for Saudi Arabia, which has insane implications for the Muslim world. So while Saudi inaction with the genocide / ethnic cleansing of Gaza and Saudi normalization of relations with Israel has always been understood and criticized, most of the pro-Palestinian movement has fallen short of at least investigating the possibility that the Saudis might actually be invested in the genocide and ethnic cleansing of Gaza. So the Saudi Public Investment Fund has engaged in substantial investments within the United States, including a notable $20 billion commitment to an infrastructure funded by Blackstone Group in 2017. So when we saw the fact that Americans are not able to buy homes in the United States is because Blackstone bought at least 40% of residential properties in the United States. That's directly connected to Saudi Arabia. So the reason why you as an American should probably kind of care about all this is because the fact that you cannot afford a home right now is directly connected to the fact that little kids are being bombed in Gaza. There's the direct pipeline there. So, and also they own about 5% of Tesla, which also might. So a point I'm trying to make is that while we look at Israel, while we look at the United States, we have to understand that this international class of capitalists, it has no loyalties. So Saudi Arabia, they don't have loyalties to the Muslim world. They'll be more than happy to bomb Muslim kids in Gaza if it benefits their portfolio. And if Gaza is to be ethnically cleansed and turned into like a port city, it would play directly with the PGII. So just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, I mean, it would be foundational for their conception of the security of the IMEC corridor as well, and that's another reason the India to Europe pipeline that goes through from Mumbai through the Gulf states across Jordan, leaves Haifa and goes to Europe, and that's another reason why we need regional stability. But I guess to talk about the lobbying thing, the lobbying section, and how lobbying works, and how these companies are able to basically create a corporate capture of the U.S. government. I think we need to talk about the revolving door. But before we did move on, did you want to make any comments, Alina?
I was gonna say, I was gonna say to Mark, I was actually gonna bring that up in part 2. That's part 2, which I was gonna include in the lobbying process about Saudi Arabia.
I beat you to it,
and
Alina.
I have,
no matter.
Yeah, I'm writing part 2 still. Like
first.
it takes time to write this. No, but actually, so I was gonna add something about that because he makes a valid point. And in fact, I mean, even in these, I think even recently Saudi Arabia, whenever Saudi Arabia, I think even recently again says, oh, we're gonna invest 600 billion. We're going to, or like even the UAE, we're gonna invest 1.4 trillion United States. What they're saying is like they're going to invest in the the corporations that are the same corporations that are funding the particular war machine. So and so you're making a very valid point. And simultaneously, the thing with Saudi Arabia is that they're trying to play both sides because they're also heavily investing right now a lot in China as well and BRICS, but they're also going to be investing in this project as well within Western Asia. And also just like one last little addition, because I don't want to stay too long on this so we can get into like everything else with regards to lobbying and how it works and revolving doors. I was going to say a lot of people don't always pay attention to realtors, but actually the real estate industry is one of the biggest in the United States, and like in terms of like the and their corporate capture, not just in the US but around the world. Because even if you think, like, the fact of the matter is, when the pandemic happened, or even when the war in Ukraine began, and obviously we had this inflation brought about the increase in interest rates, that and then there was a lot of people who had essentially started to default on their mortgages and they were losing their homes. This was loads of fun for realtors. They were buying out cheap property, which is why corporations, like you said, have bought out so much of America's sort of real estate sector, and they're now defining essentially that market where people can't afford homes. So, and look, who's the number one lobbying
it's undocumented
organization?
immigrants that are buying up all the homes.
Yeah, that's
really
what it is. But if you, and who's the number one lobbying group in the I think the Statista that I report, it's actually the National Association of Realtors. They come number one, and so and they're also the ones that are purchasing huge chunks of territory in lots of areas within the global South as well. So, this is why I agree with you. It's an entire systemic issue that everybody then wants to both have. It's just Israel.
A little note on the fact that they're the WS lobby. The reason why they probably donate the most money in lobby money to our politicians is because that sector holds the greatest risk for insurrection in the United States, or the greatest rebellion, because Americans not owning homes and the homeless crisis is the biggest, probably the biggest catalyst for legitimate disgruntled uprising in the United States. So that means that they have to pump extra money for lobbying to make sure that there is absolutely no measures passed that protect your average home buyer. They have to keep it within the corporate.
It's neo-feudalism. It's neo-feudalism. Like it's like establishing a rentier class, which they will constantly not allowing people to economically grow and prosper. Like we're going backwards at this point. Like we're actually going backwards. But to go to lobbying.
I just wanted to say that it really makes a lot of sense too. Like, even if you don't investigate the economics behind it, why real estate developers or conglomeration of real estate developers would donate the most to politicians in order to get them to mobilize government forces to protect them, properties, etc. Because they're not stupid. Everyone learned about the French Revolution, or any revolution that's happened since freaking Aristotle started writing about oligarchy. Who dies first? The landlords.
The landlords.
The landlords.
Yeah. They have think tanks. They have corporate think tanks that actually go through, sit around in a board meeting and try to analyze, okay, what should we spend most of our lobbying money on? Because what sector holds the most risk of insurrection in the United States?
Right. So let's talk about corporate capture and one of the most identifiable ways by which it happens. Okay. So this is just going to be the baseline definition for you guys. It's called the revolving door, and it's literally just a metaphor. So in politics, a revolving door basically refers to one distinct phenomena. Primarily, it denotes a situation wherein personnel move between roles as legislators or regulators, like congressmen or regulatory officials inside federal organizations in the public sector, and then move after their contract's up or their employment's done to employees or lobbyists of private industries affected by state legislation and regulations in the private sector. So you go to be a congressman, then you go to work for a think tank. You're a general, now you go and work as a lobbyist for Raytheon. You were a colonel, now you go for General Dynamics. And then, you were at a regulatory agency in the FAA. All right, now you can go work for SpaceX, and then work for SpaceX, come back as a regulator. And so you start seeing this merging between the public and private sector, between, again, employees or lobbyists of industries and the legislators that are supposed to be regulating them. So critics assert that such a relationship between the government and kind of like private sector can lead to a conflict of interest. You think? And regulatory capture based on the granting of reciprocated privileges between them. So regulatory capture, and this is a big part of what we're talking about, is a form of corruption of authority that occurs when a political entity, policymaker, or regulator is co-opted to serve the commercial, ideological, or political interests of a minor constituency, i.e., the capitalist ruling class, the corporatists, the oligarchs, whatever you want to call them, such as a particular geographic area, industry, profession, or ideological or class-based group. So, yes, revolving door leads to regulatory capture of our government that serves the interests of a very select few people. And, the term has also been used to kind of refer to the constant switching and ousting of political leaders from office. But no, when we say revolving door, it's about moving from the public sector to the private sector, back to the public sector, vice versa, over the term of decades. So a great instance of
it's good that you said the word regulatory capture too, because that's another blind spot that liberals and leftists leave out, is the fact that leftists get excited whenever they pass regulations on businesses, right? They're like, oh yeah, finally we're stepping in and but when in fact regulations enforce the market share of big business, because while it seems great on the surface that the government passes some regulation that, say, puts a limit on how many chairs you can put in a restaurant or something, these regulations are celebrated by the left, when in fact what they do is they put extra burdens on your mom and pop businesses, and the big corporations, they can cut through the regulation with butter, through their lawyers, through lawfare, and just through their capital that they have to be able to afford maintaining good standing within those regulations. So it's a blind spot for leftists that I would encourage you guys to keep an eye out for. Do not automatically celebrate when the government passes some regulation, because most likely that regulation was lobbied by a big corporation to keep the competition low. Anyways.
I completely agree as somebody who spent extensive years in law school. The vast majority of international laws, but also national pieces of, legislation. It's very complex, as you have to get into every piece, but for the most part, they're not accessible for the average working class person. And beyond that, the measures by which to actually enforce them are pretty much non-existent and very lax, and they're just more they're just there more for the aesthetic than actually to set any sort of standard. What I was also going to say, in addition to what Greg was stating, because I just want to actually put out some stats, it's actually interesting because 80% of military personnel, because you had actually mentioned 80% of military personnel in the United States then go on to work for the major defense corporations, according to, I think, Citizens Justice. That means, and actually, we've even seen the former secretaries of defense, at least two. We saw, what's his name? Lloyd Austin.
He was on
Lloyd
the
Austin.
board of Raytheon.
Yeah, he was on the board of Raytheon. And then I think James Mattis, prior to him, he was a board member for General Dynamics as well. So, I mean, a lot of them, so, when you have, these particular officials, like, are supposed to be for serving the United States, that are also then either they have worked for or are going to go on to work for, and this 80%, that's pretty much almost the vast majority of them are going to go off to work for these major corporations, who, have vested interests in, instigating global war, such as what's happening in the Middle East. Obviously, there's going to be a conflict of interest, and we usually call this as well like a form of like shadow lobbying as well, because they then also go on to they don't even have to necessarily register as lobbyists, because technically they're not. If they've gone on to, if they used to work, for example, for Raytheon, or if they used to work for Lockheed Martin, and now they've come into work for the United States or military department, etc., they're not technically lobbying, but there is a connection between the two and how they operate. So it actually goes even more incognito than proper actual lobbying organizations. And
And you know what's even more insidious? And I just want to give people the most egregious example of the revolving door, which we brought up earlier during the Iraq War. Literally, Dick Cheney, CEO of Halliburton, vice president, going back into the private sector afterwards. Like that is the most insane example. But I did want to say something like corruption. And I just, when we think about it, people think about like nepotism, cronyism, bribery in the form of duffel bags full of money. But in this world, when you talked about shadow lobbying, it could also be like, hey, you're a regulator, and you're not actually being lobbied by a lobbyist. You're just communicated, and it's made known to you that, like, hey, when you get out of the job, like, this is what kind of contract you're looking at. Like, look at we can't give you any money in a bag, but stock options, man. Look at this salary you get.
Your son wants to start his own restaurant. Tell you what, I know a guy, an investor, who will invest right in your son's. It's little things. The same thing happens in the drug industry when they lobby doctors, to push a drug that may be harmful for their patient. It's just little under the table things that you would have no way of tracing it. You would have no way of proving it. And even if you had all the facts in a court of law, it would look like just another favor from a stranger. So, it's that simple. It really is that easy to do.
It's sort of as well the example I brought up earlier when I discussed actually the Iraq War, and I spoke about specifically, the UK, for example. Even in the UK, I mean, I said the former ambassador of the UK to Iraq, who was the ambassador to Iraq during the war, 3 months after the invasion, went on to work for BP, and vice versa. And these are the corporations that made the most out of the war. So this just goes to show like how these people interplay with one another. Like how we also said, I mean, Condoleezza Rice made so much money for Chevron, they named a tanker after her, for God's sakes. I mean, and she was Secretary of State, if I remember correctly, of the United States at the time. And these are the people that are governing, who are in power. They're serving the interests of the oligarchy. And to add to this, because a lot of people like to always discuss the $17 million that AIPAC gave to the U.S. elections campaigns through PACs, etc., or lobbying. I mean, the big oil gave. I wrote it down. So, Big Oil alone gave $445 million. Then you've got Big Pharma, $387.5 million. And Big Pharma, by the way, they also make a lot of money out of war, diseases, pestilence, or everything that's being generated out of war. They're able to use people as experimentation. Yeah.
Also, Big Pharma gets, before a mass deployment, they get huge amounts of government contracts.
I was about to say that.
Because of the vaccines that they have to give the soldiers.
Before I went into a combat theater, I'd get about 10 different vaccines. Multiply that by
and health insurance.
50,000.
and all the health protection for the for all the soldiers and military personnel that go out there. Then obviously you've got, I think around 100 million was also given by defense corporations. Again, these are also the ones that are disclosed. And something else I actually wanted to also get into as well is how lobbying and PACs actually work, because I feel like a lot of people don't understand how they operate. So just to wrap up that point, when you start looking at how many millions and billions go into lobbying, which are coming from all the private sector, it literally dwarfs anything that comes out of AIPAC or the Anti-Defamation League, which is why it is absolutely ridiculous to assume for a second that the entirety of the United States, and much like as well, like Mark mentioned earlier, when they have their own corporate interests, and when so many members of Congress as well, and by the way, 60% of members of Congress also go then on to work for like JP Morgan or BlackRock and all these other institutions, or 52% of people in the U.S. Treasury also work for Goldman Sachs, etc. Who, these financial institutions that make a lot of profits off of war, by essentially, by generating indebtedness that then they come in to funnel and say, oh, we're here to save you, and it's what we call the war machine. So again, so many members of government, people who work in the official state, who then go off to work or on to work for these private institutions. But then I also wanted to bring up how, what lobbying is. And there's a difference between like lobbying organizations, like the ones that I've just, that we saw on the Statista report on the page. And then we also have PACs and super PACs and hybrid PACs. For example, in the recent presidential campaign, I think it was, what was it called? I've got them written down because I can't remember all of them. Act Blue, which was for, I think the Democrats made 1.1 billion in donations for Kamala Harris. And then you had Red Wind that came in with 682, I think, million. And for, obviously, it was Donald Trump, among others. And the interesting thing about PACs and the interesting thing about lobbying organizations. So beyond the fact that they're there to obviously as well to a certain degree compromise. Has Mark left us?
I don't know. Let's just keep going.
Or is that an accident? Okay, so beyond the fact that obviously lobbying works to, I guess, bring about the fusion of the corporate and the public and the private sector together, just sort of, the kind of bouncing off of each other. The other aspect as well is how they're used for tax evasion, money laundering, through the form of dark money. And I think it's something very important because at the end of the day, lobbying PACs, they're also part of a business model. And I think it's very important for people to understand why they as well exist in that context. Because an argument that I often hear as well for people from the pro-Palestine movement is like, well, I mean, if AIPAC has a need to to actually lobby the United States government, there must be a reason. It means that no, Israel isn't acting like a proxy. It means that obviously the United States and the corporate interests are in direct antithesis with Israel, and that's why they have to go about it. Absolutely not. I mean, it's the same question, the same line of logic could be, well, why the hell does ExxonMobil or Meta have to lobby for the United States, or Lockheed Martin have to lobby, when in many ways we have seen they're part and parcel of the same establishment? Therefore, there would appear there would be no need for them to actually lobby. But it actually does work as a bit of a business model as well. And I wanted to tackle that. So for example, a lot of these, the associations that we just saw, a lot of those associations are actually governed by the internal sort of tax, internal, what's it called? The IRS and the IRC.
Internal Revenue Service.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So, and I think it's actually section 501C 4 and 6. And they're basically classified as nonprofit organizations. And so the whole purpose behind particularly lobby groups, such as the United States Chamber of Commerce, as well as the United States sort of National Association of Realtors, etc., their entire purpose is actually to lobby legislation, etc., but not to actually fund or in any way, to fund. Hello, Mark. We lost you there for a bit. But yeah, Yeah, the whole purpose of these associations is actually to lobby for legislation, but they're not allowed to technically have direct sort of campaigning for specific candidates and get involved in presidential elections. That's where PACs come in. So PACs are specifically made to be able to target and influence, I guess, elections and candidates, etc. Whereas, yeah, like I said, these nonprofit organizations are meant more for legislation and influencing legislation. But this is the thing: they're classified as nonprofit organizations, both I think 501c4 and 6. And Section 501c covers social welfare organizations, whereas Section 501c6 actually covers sort of the business leagues or trade organizations or oil giants, etc. And because they're classified as nonprofit organizations, not only are they tax exempt, but simultaneously, they don't actually have to ever disclose how much money they make, which actually allows for the vast majority of them, it means a lot of money, corruption money from, abroad that might be corruption orientated, actually flows through these organizations as well, and they then go into the political establishment, and they're able to actually bring it out again, as in as a form of money laundering. Like, they're basically cleaning out their money. This is something else these sort of nonprofits actually do. And with PACs, which are also tax exempt, so you have PACs and you have super PACs. With
All right,
PACs,
let me go ahead and define terms. We're getting kind of fast here.
Oh yeah, because I was just trying to cover as much and not give too much of a monologue.
Yeah, so PACs, and sorry, I should have insisted on defining this at the beginning, is a political action committee, which is kind of like this popular term or for a political committee organized for the purpose of raising and spending money to elect and defeat candidates. There are caps on how much they can give, but they again are tax exempt. So again, they can, they form around issues, candidates, etc. So, and they're also used to raise money. Many politicians also form like leadership PACs as a way of raising money to help fund other candidates' campaigns. And it's a whole different world, but yes, they're nonprofits and they're raising money for, electing or defeating candidates. Now, super PACs are a little bit different. It's a new type of PAC that was kind of created around 2010, I think.
Yeah.
And these PACs make no contribution to candidates or parties. However, they're still part of the election process because they make independent expenditures on like federal races. So like running ads, sending emails, communicating in other ways with messages that specifically advocate the election or defeat of a specific candidate. So instead of giving election money directly to a candidate, like a PAC does, a super PAC just kind of is on the sidelines, sending mail, running attack ads, etc. So most basic.
I have a question about PACs that I've never bothered to look up. I don't know why. After an election that a candidate loses, what happens to the leftover money that was not spent?
Oh, this is what I was trying to explain. The whole purpose of a PAC is really fundamentally to just funnel out money for themselves, get tax exemptions, and basically it's a way where millions, if not billions, are actually it's a form of like even tax evasion. Like that's actually what it really is. And then some of it obviously goes to the candidates as a form of lobbying. Sure, so it works as lobbying, but it also works as saving money. It's a very complex sort of web that goes on. So like Greg said, so I think it was in 2010 they established a super PACs. It was a Citizens United case, which basically said kind of Citizens. It was a combination of two cases.
It was speech. I just looked this up. Speech Now versus the FEC.
Yeah. So what is it combined both. So what the first case that happened was actually the Citizens United, because in that case, the court found that basically laws that were restricting political spending of corporations violated the First Amendment. So initially within PACs, the idea is, there's a certain amount of restriction as to who can spend money on PACs and any sort of independent, I guess, spending, but that was essentially removed. And then came the Speed Now case, and the decision was that since independent spending could not be limited, then contributions to groups, aka that's how super PACs seem to be, groups making such spending could also not be limited. So super PACs were established to basically kind of provide an organized, like a group where whereas with PACs there is some sort of restriction, like you can't give too much and you have to disclose the donors. With super PACs, you can give as much as you want. You can give billions into that super PAC, and you don't have to disclose who the donors are either. So it's completely up for grabs. And yeah, the only aspect is it created. Yes, it was like super PACs are actually called independent expenditure only committees, and what they mean by that is that as long as the super PAC spends on advertisements and aggressive campaigns for candidates, it's acceptable as long as they're not actually coordinating that with the candidate itself. How they're able to prove that that's not coordinated, I don't know, because there's nobody really there to actually monitor this, but this is essentially what that is. And the situation is that, and what's most problematic is that a lot of these lobby organizations, right, that we saw, like the U.S. Commerce, for example, the U.S., what's it called? Chamber of Commerce, for instance, they'll have a lobbying group, like which are like not, so the U.S. Chamber of Commerce itself is a nonprofit, right, which spends billions in lobbying for or millions in lobbying for like legislation. And then they'll also establish a PAC or a super PAC, or you have hybrid PACs, and those are even more problematic because the hybrid PACs are a mixture of being a PAC and a super PAC, which means that they can essentially they can get as many donations as they want, therefore violating the whole purpose of being just a traditional PAC, don't have to disclose, who their donors are, and they get a right to actually fund candidates directly anyway. So what the hell is the point of having a distinction between a PAC and a super PAC when you can actually have a hybrid PAC is beyond me.
Now that we're like established, circling back to the first segment, that we're like kind of in fascism right now, it really doesn't even matter anymore. I'm just going to pull this guy up. I don't know if you guys are tracking this story.
What happened?
Elon Musk hands out $1 million payments after Wisconsin Supreme Court declines request to stop him. So Green Bay, Elon Musk gave out $1 million checks on Sunday to 2 Wisconsin voters, declaring them spokespeople for his political group ahead of a Wisconsin Supreme Court election that tech billionaire cast as critical to Donald Trump's agenda and the future of civilization. So yeah, now he's just claiming these guys like spokespeople for his committee, and it's a gift. Like, this is literally political bribery we're saying now. It's not even a PAC. It's not even a money laundering scheme. He's just shelling out.
Do you feel like it's just like hyper normalization where they're just trying to get us just normalized to it so they don't even have to put up the decorum of on the table honest practices? I feel like that's what they're doing. They're just numbing us with so much blatant corruption that we're just kind of like, that's America now. That's how I feel. That's what I feel like they're doing. Just hyper normalization.
Well, I mean, the term was coined by a Soviet anthropologist who was like, everyone knows the system's failing, but everyone's just like going along with it. Essentially, we're actually going to do a whole episode on hyper normalization with a different anthropologist. But the entire thing.
Slow this up. Hold on. I'm gonna have to go soon. So if we're gonna hit up the Jew conspiracies, let me know because I'm gonna have to dip out or do a hard out. In the words of Greg Stoker.
Sorry to I guess cut you off. We can circle back to the PACs at the end. Do you want to just wrap that up for like a minute or so, Elena?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that essentially, when you have things like super PACs and PACs, these are all created by the same lobby organization, the same nonprofits. They tend to work together. A lot of these nonprofits, again, I'll use the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, there's like 46 contributors make up like something like more than 50% of the contributions. They don't really in any way represent the 3,000, corporations in the United States. It really is about the billionaire class. And then these same billionaire class establish super PACs, and these hybrid PACs that they then also use to basically find ways to exempt themselves as a form of tax exemption. And then I just want to bring up one last thing, which is shell nonprofits as well, where there's thousands in the United States, thousands of so-called PACs or super PACs or nonprofits rather that are established. They don't have an office, they don't have a staff, they don't exist, they only exist on paper. And the whole purpose of them is to influence US elections, but also money laundering, tax evasion, hiding donors. And so the point of having lobbies, the point of having these organizations to begin with, it's just another way for capitalism to basically, fuel itself. It's a way for the billionaire and millionaire class to find ways to, as a form, to not have to evade on taxation, to sustain their profits, to grow their profits, while simultaneously creates business models. And the money that's flowing through these PACs and organizations like lobbying organizations, they're actually then become part of the overall GDP, artificially inflating the GDP like this is some sort of a business, but it actually doesn't. So it serves multiple purposes. And I think that's why when people look at AIPAC a little bit and ADF and they hyper focus on that 70 million that or whatever that AIPAC gave in the recent elections, it dwarfs in comparison to everything else. But to ask yourself why do they actually have to lobby? I was like, well, lobbying has multiple purposes as well. This is another means by which lobbying is also used.
Yeah. And so it inflate profits, slash regulations, influence policy that's beneficial to the company itself in the most basic terms. These are reasons why lobbies existed. Like just like Boeing wants more favorable conditions from the US government, so does Israel. It's not rocket surgery. So so now that we've talked about capitalist decay into fascism, which we started off with, we talked about the lobbying system, we've talked about the communal purpose, the capitalist purpose of subjugating West Asia, destroying the axis of resistance in order to, help imperialist interests, extraction interests within the region, as well as combat China's initiative for global infrastructure, the Belt and Road, with the G7 counter initiative, the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. We talked about the Citizens United case, the revolving door, about how these lobbyists, which dwarf AIPAC, influence our foreign policy and domestic policy. We can finally talk about, I think, Jewish conspiracy theories and why, in the context of everything we've said, they don't really hold a lot of water, in my opinion.
Well, it's good that we left off on AIPAC, because the question, it leaves this like glaring question: why is AIPAC the one that's front and center in the media, on podcast, on big platform podcast, right? I think there's a conspiracy behind that, and I think it's to stoke Jew hatred. I really do. I think it's to shift the focus of the overall conglomerate of capitalism and put it on Jews. So I titled this so buckle up. This is going to be like a long one, but because you have to put a lot of
I got 15 minutes.
You know what? I got 15 minutes. I got 7 minutes, but I'm still going to do it.
All right, you gotta.
All right,
you're gonna have to condense it.
I don't know. I'm not condensing shit. You all could have condensed it like 30 minutes ago. No, I titled this one Fink versus Finkelstein. So, we kind of first have to define what a Jew is real quick. A Jew has a religious connotation. So anybody who converts to Judaism is considered a Jew. Anybody who is descendant of somebody who converted Judaism some time ago can be considered Jewish. And it's also like considered an ethnic designation if you belong to that. It's a tribal designation. If you're Jewish and you belong to that tribe of Judaism, you're considered Jewish. It's kind of like a very amorphous concept. But so the going conspiracy theory is that the Western world is controlled by Jews. So this stems from the fact that Jewish people are overrepresented in finance, media, law, Hollywood, and the corporate world. The obvious problem with that statement is that it implies that Jews are a monolith, and it disregards the fact that Jews are also overrepresented in protest and hatred of finance, media, law, Hollywood, and the corporate world. As we can see in the pro-Palestinian movement, Jews are very prominent and represent some of the biggest critics and academics against Zionism and the state of Israel, even as a concept. However, this is important. We still cannot simply ignore the question of why Jews are overrepresented in the Western world's most powerful institutions that cause so much destruction on our planet. And by ignoring that question, it can allow the hatred of Jews as a whole to fill the void of that discussion that needs to be had. So that's where you get your bro podcasts that talk about the Jews. They will fill in the void if we don't talk about it. So how do we answer this paradox, right? So how do we outline the fact that most Jews are just normal people who hate the same assholes destroying this planet that we all hate, while at the same time addressing the fact that Jewish people are overrepresented in the cockpit of capitalism? How do we reconcile the existence of great men of conscience like Norman Finkelstein with evil capitalist oligarchs like Larry Fink? I believe I found the answer to that paradox, and it's the same argument that Israel uses about Hamas, except I'm actually using it properly. Human shields. See, one thing that capitalism and empire are good at is promoting and placing in positions of power people who are willing to burn their own kind. Just like Israel accuses Hamas of embedding itself among innocent civilians, which is, of course, complete tired propaganda. But in the case of capitalism, it's very true. Empires have and will embed corrupt and greedy men within a group that can offer them cover. Historically, this is especially true among European Jewish communities, as opposed to, say, Mizrahi or Sephardic Jewish communities. Because of the generally sinister nature of medieval European society, it was a breeding ground for traditions of dark and exploitive power strategies among every community, Protestants and Catholics included. The Jewish community was no different. Many wealthy and greedy Jewish men figured out that they could use their own communities as cover. So when shit hit the fan, they could simply maintain their wealth and allow average poor Jews to take the hit. Throughout the 17th and 20th centuries, certain wealthy Jews, Jewish financiers, and community elites forged close ties with European imperial regimes, often known as court Jews or Hofjuden. These individuals served as monarchs, as bankers, war suppliers, tax collectors, and advisors. Think Henry Kissinger. In return, they gained privileges far beyond those of average Jews: the right to reside outside ghettos, exemption from wearing identifying badges, permission to own property, and other special protections. However, their collaboration came at a cost. While they prospered and even used their influence to aid rulers, the broader Jewish population often remained oppressed, heavily taxed, and subject to popular anti-Semitic backlash. So this is a very useful tool for European empires. Imperial capitalism has figured out how to use religion as its chief tools of dominance. It uses the Jewish community as its banking system, and it uses Christians as its war machine. In fact, wealthy Jewish bankers like the Warburgs financed the Third Reich, while Hitler used Christians as its fighting force. Both Jews and Christians were massacred together in that war and that Holocaust to the pleasure of the wealthy capitalist Jews and wealthy capitalist Christians and wealthy capitalist atheists who financed and ordered them to fight and die.
Okay, real quick. This is a really good point. Remember when I got in that drunken argument with Dan Bilzerian?
Yeah.
After I made that episode talking shit about his Piers Morgan interview, and then he went into my DMs, being like, "Hey, bro, heard you're talking shit," and then he was harping on this idea that like the Jews were like working with the Nazis and they're in charge of the banks. I was like, dude, it's about class.
It's about class.
They threw the middle class, the working class Jews under the fucking
bus. Under the bus. Yeah. It's human shields. Anyways, human shields. So
anyways,
and going into detail about and giving more details about that, the Warburg family, particularly Max Warburg, who was Jewish, sat on the board of IG Farben, the German industrial conglomerate that later played a role in the Nazi war machine and the Holocaust. So there's your Larry Fink, right? Max Warburg was Jewish, technically, and initially served as an economic advisor in Weimar, Germany. His brother, Paul Warburg, was a key figure in American finance and helped establish the U.S. Federal Reserve. And let's not forget the Havara Agreement, where elite Jews collaborated with the Nazis to help them finance Hitler's empire at the expense of poor and average Jews who paid the price with in the gas chambers. See, one thing you'll notice about all of these powerful Jews who control levers of finance, they're all white and they're all capitalists. One thing you'll notice about the Christians who sent us to war, they're all white and they're all capitalists. You really don't see any brown-skinned socialist Jews in Congress or Wall Street, and you definitely don't see any brown-skinned Christians sending our boys and girls to kill brown people and die in foreign soil, except Colin Powell. Okay, but the question remains: what better people for empire to use as its managers than the people of Jewish background? So when people finally start to wake up about the abusive nature of capitalism, instead of blaming the oligarchs, they'll just blame average Jews, and the oligarchs will get away scot-free. And just like the Warburgs who financed Hitler, most of the top brass Nazis got away scot-free via Operation Paperclip. So to say that the world is collectively controlled by Jews then how come most of the top brass Nazis got away? You would think that they would go hunt them down and they wouldn't be engrafted into our American system to form NASA, to form a lot of our institutions. We're Nazis. So the common denominator here is Caucasian and capitalist. That's the common denominator, is not Jewish. So the human shields argument is the one that I believe solves the paradox of explaining the fact that Jews are overrepresented in these institutions, while also explaining the fact that Jews in general are just average fucking people who hate capitalism, who hate the same abuse that we do. And most Jews, by the way, are not religious. Most Jews are either atheist, agnostic, or whatever. They are descendants of people who were part of Judaism. So that's another thing. So when you hear the statistics saying that the majority of Jews, like a ridiculous number, like 90% of Jews support Israel, they're suddenly changing the definition of Jews to mean people who actually go to synagogue, which, yes, the majority of them do support Israel, because just like the Christian church, Zionism, which is just another tool of empire, has infiltrated all institutions of religion. The Catholic Church, the Protestant Church, evangelicals, and Judaism is no different. Synagogues are infiltrated just like your average church is infiltrated by capitalist imperialism agendas. So that's my take. And by the way, guys, I just solved racism just now. I just solved anti-Semitism.
I thought that was a nice little essay.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was great. I was going to add one or two things, like just as a compliment, actually, to what Mark said. I was also going to say that it was really funny. It's rather funny when you think about it, because actually, historically as well, when the Russian Revolution happened, and the socialism, communism was also considered to be a Jewish conspiracy, because so many of the most prominent
thought you were going to bring up the anti-Bolshevik neo-Nazi stuff.
No, but it absolutely was. I mean, you had, Rosa Luxemburg, Karl Marx himself. They were all, they were all people who were Jewish. I mean, they were all atheists for the most part. They weren't really, practicing Jews or anything like that, but they were all of Jewish heritage, and they were the biggest capitalist, anti-imperialists, and who have, contributed so much to leftist socialist literature, and who stood against, bourgeois nationalism, and especially things like, a Zionist ideology. It was, even Lenin was he didn't know at the time, but he was also supposedly has Jewish ancestry. So many of the greatest and most prominent thinkers were actually of Jewish ancestry. And it was, at the time, it was, the whole idea was communism was a threat to traditional values and therefore capitalism. And that's why the Jews, that, communism is a Jewish concept. So again, the Jewish conspiracy even fell into that category. And the second thing I was going to add, which I think is also kind of important, is that historically, one of the reasons as well is that Jews have been, I guess, disproportionately represented in the capitalist class, in the wealthy class, is actually because they had a bit of a historical advantage in one way, because they were prosecuted to the degree that they were hunted down. In order for them to be able to sustain and continue to practice their Jewish faith, a lot of Jewish people were coerced, especially when their temples were destroyed, to actually learn how to read and write. So they were some of the first groups of people that were able to read and write historically, which therefore meant that they were given positions, higher positions
within the courts,
in governance. Yeah. I mean, when even the Arab rule of Spain, the Arabs were actually placing the Jews in like top positions of like judicial, tax, etc., because they were the only ones that knew how to read and write, which gave them, to a certain degree, that gave them an advantage over the average, working class, the poor, the peasants. Most of them didn't know how to what the hell was going on around them.
And to explain why there are stories where there were nefarious Jews within that elite class that rose to power and took advantage of it, is because the same reason why you have any asshole in any group that's going to use their power to gain an advantage of their own community. It's just assholes embedded. But if if an asshole is able to maintain his power and build hegemony around it, then you can further snowball that throughout history and accumulate more power at the expense of the community, which is then persecuted. Like the Havana Agreement allowed elite Jews to escape Germany and leaving all the average Jews behind to die. So it's the same thing. And empire knows that if you use Jews as a human shield, well, then any criticism you direct at capitalism, they can just say, oh, you're anti-Semitic, because look at all these people who are in power. They're Jewish. So that means that you hate Jews. It's a perfect cover. It's a perfect human shield, in my opinion. So there's like, it's not good to shut down arguments and saying, oh, let's not talk about the overrepresentation of Jews in power. It's like, no, we need to talk about it, because if we don't talk about it and break it all down, then guess who's going to step in?
Candace Owen.
Nick Fuentes is going to step in, and he's going to fill in the void, which is why we have to like, it's the disagreement that I have with certain people in the movement is where they're like, no, it's anti-Semitic even talking about that. Let's not talk about it. Like, no, because you're actually sabotaging the efforts of dissecting this and sorting it out and sifting through the bullshit versus the reality. And like you said, with every corrupt capitalist Jewish person, you have 1,000 Jewish people who are fighting against it in leftist circles, and at some point we'll get in
some of the greatest minds.
At some point, I also want to address the whole Talmud controversy, because the majority of Jews do not read the Talmud. The majority of Jews Judaism is a dying religion. It's statistically speaking, it's going down. There's a reason for that, because most Jews cannot relate to the Torah. They don't believe in it, so therefore they're leaving. Like, and we cannot like ignore the fact that there's problematic stuff in the Talmud. Obviously there is, right? Just like there is in the Bible. But we cannot associate the Talmud with Jews, because most Jews have left Judaism. The majority of Jews are not in Judaism, practicing Judaism, because they cannot relate to the Talmud and they're vehemently against it.
Right.
So I mean,
and I guess like we can't on this platform, or at least in this episode,
dive into the whole thing.
Basically address every like anti-Semitic theory, from like the Talmud stuff to the Khazar theory and other stuff like that. But just wanted to take this episode to talk about capitalism, lobbying of our own government, how that informs U.S. foreign policy more so than any one group or one nation. Again, if Israel were to disappear overnight, we would still be doing what we're doing right now. I mean, yes, they changed the dynamic, maybe even significantly, but they're not in control. And the main point, and I've got to go. Also, my mind is empty because I haven't had my fast green juice thing, which I need. But I just
your lemongrass blend.
God!
No, it's like super greens. Don't even worry about it. Hey, don't try to distract me either, because
you just forget it.
I'm not on point right now. So, basically, just. If you have that analysis that Israel's controlling everything, that we went to the Iraq war because of Israel, we're about to bomb Iran and American soldiers are about to die because of Israel, 9/11 happened because of Israel, like, you're missing the entire system that's literally fucking you over.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point I was going to finish on. I think what's important to understand is that, as Mark said, as I think you also said, Greg, is that this is really a class. So this is a class oppression, and the class in question doesn't really have a religious face. It doesn't have, I would say, doesn't have a color. It doesn't have anything. It has a group of individuals who establish a system that incentivizes. Or remember, if it's crime facilitative, and we can one day get into, like, this is sort of in criminology. We discuss on a macro level how capitalism is crime facilitative. It generates, it promotes, and it incentivizes criminal behavior, and especially individuals on a micro level who are very opportunistic will capitalize on that. So the system, the structure itself is the problem. And, whether, it's Saudi Arabia, whether it's Qatar, it's always the elite, and it's always the ruling class, whether it's even in India, Modi, etc. These individuals, they are constantly looking at their own self-interest. They are millionaires. They're going to capitalize on the structures that serve them. And, with regards to, I guess, like, even the Jewish conspiracy, there's that, they really were, it was a particular aspect of history that gave them an advantage that they were then able to exploit, among others, within this, given the material conditions as time progressed. So, and so we have to start looking at the system itself, how it operates, and how it sort of facilitates this sort of behavior as a whole. Because, like Greg said, if Israel disappeared from the map tomorrow, it's not going to change anything. If anything, Israel was created.
It'd be Taiwan. And Taiwan would be the next one.
Yeah, then Taiwan would be the next one.
is.
And honestly, and the thing is, as well, I actually feel so, because, like, Israelis, to a certain degree, we think about it, they have been indoctrinated from such a young age. They are offering themselves up like cannon fodder. Because at the end of the day, I remember seeing somebody who's very anti-Israel, like Jewish anti-Israelists, have said the most dangerous place for Jews is actually Israel. But yet they've gotten all this, they managed to actually, get these individuals to offer themselves up. So it's very strategic. And at the end of the day, it's always one group of people win, and that is the 1%, who, according to Oxfam, 1% of the world owns 95%, owns more than 95% of humanity. And that's the class. These are the people in power.
Mm-hmm. To put Alina's words in simple terms, Israel
Why did everyone say that?
Israel is the condom of capitalism in that region.
Yes.
Those were your words. Okay.
No, those were her words.
And we have a lot of religious followers, so if we get unfollowed by about 30 people, it's your fault. So
what did I do again?
Jeez. No, nothing. He's just trying to blame that on you. So
yeah, cool.
I'm laundering culpability.
I know this was a super long episode, super packed. I'm just gonna let the whole thing ride. I'm not splitting it up into two. You could hopefully maybe you sectioned it off, maybe you listen to it twice. I don't know, at the gym, on your commute back from work, which takes 2 hours and 10 minutes because America and the big oil companies do not want a public transit system because we want more cars. So
more Teslas.
Yeah.
And I hope also you guys can screen record your favorite parts of this and splurge it out on social media to help us circumvent the shadow ban, please.
Yeah. Also, really 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, please. And if you're a Zionist, I know you're going to get one. On Apple Podcasts, we have like 400 and something 5-star reviews and like 10 1-star reviews. And there's like nothing in between. So it's like, I know what's going on there. So anyways, appreciate you guys. You can send this to your uncle. It'll probably piss him off, but I don't know. Hope it was helpful to some of you. Change your minds about how to conceptualize this whole thing or not. If you don't agree with us, take what you do, add it into your own personal philosophy.
And let's put up this quick mock-up for comment section of a possible idea for a t-shirt.
No, we're ending it. No. 3, 2, 1.